We've counted 80 species of different farmland birds here, most recently. And some of those have, sadly diminished, like the lapwing. We see very few lapwing now, even with the farm ground. But then again, we are seeing more of others. The turtle dove, having gone completely, is coming back. And I, for the very first time in my life, had a nightingale all summer in my garden.
And welcome to this week's episode of Tree Lady Talks, where Sharon talks rewilding, golfing, farming, and shooting. The Braxted Park estate in Essex boasts all these things, along with a subterranean temple, a 9-hole golf course, shooting and farming ventures, whilst also offering the most idyllic surroundings for the perfect wedding. And don't think this is a bandwagon that has just been jumped on. This family are fully engaged in biodiversity net gain and have a huge respect for the land they live on. This is a fascinating insight into life on the estate, so let's meet the man who's talking to Sharon today. Probably one of the busiest men in the county, one might suggest, Mr. Duncan Clark.
Duncan, thank you very much for joining us. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure, Sharon. I came back to the family-owned estate in 2002. We've lived here as a family since 1946, when my grandfather, Sir Alan Clark, who built a wonderful success story, the Plessy Company. Unfortunately, we lost all the shares, but it was a magnificent company. It employed 75,000 people in the electrical engineering telecom space. They were a big FTSE 100 electronics company. And he decided in 1946, because the headquarters was in Ilford in Essex, he needed a place to entertain clients and operate from. So he bought Braxted for the Plessy Company. So it was a company-owned house. So the family were here really from that point, where my grandfather was in residence. And then he died in 1962, and my father then bought it from Plessy in an arm's length agreement from the company, and moved us as a family here since from about 1964. And we operated it, really. Dad worked for the Plessy Company. He ran it with his brother, and that's really what funded it. And when it got taken over by GEC in 1989, suddenly there was very little money to keep the thing going. And I came out of the 17-year career in the city in 2002, and frankly found the water somewhat over nostril, mouth level, heading northwards. And I realized we had to roll up our sleeves and get going and sort it out, which I spent 20 years doing. Basically via putting us into the weddings business in a big way. So we do about 120, 130 weddings a year, and that saved the estate. But we also have a 1,000-acre farm. We have a golf course, which my grandfather built, a 9-hole golf course inside the park. We have some offices, some properties, and we have a shoot, quite a successful pheasant and partridge shoot. And that lot together keep the roof on, as it were. And that's what I do. COVID, we got the water metaphorically down below chin level. Then COVID took it right up again. We went underwater again. And now I've just got us sort of breathing again 2 years after COVID.
Well, that's really, really interesting. And for those who don't know, could you tell us where Braxted Park is and how big it is?
Yes, Braxted Park is in Essex. It's about 45 miles from the centre of London, northeast, along the main arterial road out of London to this part of the world of Essex, Suffolk, is the A12. And we live just south of the A12. Some of your listeners may be familiar with the wonderful Tiptree jam.
Oh, yes, it's international, isn't it?
Indeed, it is. And we are no more than 4 or 5 miles from the Tiptree jam factory.
That's a really good geo reference there.
And another great landmark is Malden Salt, which, again, many of your international listeners, as well as your domestic ones, will know. And Malden Salt and Tiptree Jam are our two great success stories, lovely local companies, good friends of ours, by the way. Often we use a lot of their stuff here in our events business, and they use us for corporate and company events. There are two parts of the estate. There's the parkland inside a 4.5 mile red brick wall. It's a grade 2-star listed park. And I use this phrase advisedly. It is of, quote, exceptional significance, unquote, in the Historic England Register of Parks and Gardens in this country. And Braxted Park is one of the very few walled parks, and it's an enormous 4.5 mile red brick wall, open brackets, headache to me, because I am obliged to look after it. It may be very valuable, but you can't monetize it. You only have to keep it up. So it's a huge obligation and liability. That's about 500 acres. And outside the wall, we've got about another 1,000 acres or so of basically farmland and ancient woodland and semi-ancient woodland and some more modern woodland. And the whole lot together is around 1,500 or 700 hectares, 1,500 acres, something, 1,600 acres, something like that.
The building itself is stunning. So you turn off the country lane and you go down this magnificent avenue, and the vista of this beautiful building is ahead of you. So just describe for the listeners what the building looks like.
Yes, you come down this incredible drive, and it's extraordinary because it's a triple lime avenue. That's very unusual. Normally lime avenues are single rows, but this is a triple row on either side of you. And as you come down the drive, it's about 300 yards long. The house, which is it's a 1750 Georgian beauty, red brick, and it was constructed by an architect called Sir Robert Taylor. And its number one feature are these extraordinary octagonal windows. If you look it up, www.braxtedpark.com on Google, you'll see these windows. And as you come down the drive, the house sort of grows and gets longer and longer to the right-hand side. The center of it is a sort of C-shaped 2-story with an attic. So you can actually call it 3-story, but it's basically 2-story, red brick. And on either side, at the bottom of the drive, before you go up to the house, are these two fantastic lakes. On the left, the lake extends to about 10 acres, and on the right, it's a couple of acre lake. And it goes under the drive. And it's very, very peaceful, beautiful, classic English parkland setting.
It's stunning, absolutely. And I did read that it was one of the earliest recorded deer parks.
Yes, the Countess of Pembroke refers to it in about 1340 in letters. So that's its earlier sort of. But there were inhabitants here before then. But the description Deer Park in those days is not at all the same as a walled park as it is now. It was much more basic, but it was stocked with lots of deer and other things. And in those days, the village was around nearer the church, which got subsumed by the lake. When there were 3 great sort of builders of this estate, as you see it today. They were all called Duquesne, D-U-C-A-N-E. Peter Duquesne, number 1, 1750 to 1802, he built the house. His son, Peter Duquesne II, built the back of the house and the lakes. And the third one was the guy that built the wall. So the three of them put it together as you see it today.
We had the pleasure of visiting recently with Ted Green and Jill Butler and some wonderful ARBs, and you very generously showed us round. And you've got this incredible building where you go down some stairs, and it won an award. So tell us about this mysterious building.
It's a remarkable building, and the beauty of it is it's a real enigma. No one really knows what it is. We have an academic called James Wen who reckons he's figured it out and thinks it's an incredibly important building in the history of the English Protestant Church. But basically, it's a sort of subterranean temple, and it's got it's rather like the Pantheon. It's a mini Pantheon. It's got this domed roof, these columns, a sort of donut circle in the middle, and it's got a little mini version of itself stuck on the side. So some people thought it may have been a very, very early camera obscura. There are all sorts of strange things going on in it. And possibly what happened was when Peter Duquesne number 2 built his lake and a dam wall, just nearby was Dad's strange Masonic temple building. And with a little bit of work, he knocked one, he built a passageway into it, and thereby got himself a sort of Bakshi lakeside folly, which of course they all loved. So it may have had one function, then it got another. Either way, it's a lovely mystery. And James Wen has some incredibly fancy academic reasoning behind why it was built, based upon the dodecahedron, some kind of mathematical geometric shape, which I don't understand, to be honest. But it's a lovely idea, and I'm longing for him to write a book on why this building is so important, and he's in that process. And in fact, I think he's going to do a series of lectures. The church within the wall, the living of that is owned by Corpus Christi, Cambridge, and I think he's intending to do a wonderful series of lectures with all the masters and the fellows of Corpus Christi in situ. So we look forward to that.
Fantastic. And in the meantime, the bats are flourishing inside.
Indeed. A wonderful bat haven. We're only allowed in it when the bats are not hibernating.
Yeah, excellent. And in terms of our living green monuments, you have a large, gnarly, squat, whiskery veteran tree, don't you?
We do. And your ARBs came to have a good look at that. And I think they thought it was about 500 or 600 years old.
Yeah. We always like to think things are a little bit older, don't we? Nobody really knows. But that was based on measuring the trunk diameter at the base of the tree, not at 1 metre, measured by Jill Butler and Ted Green. They both had a good look and everybody discussed it. But what I love about it, it's so big, fat, squat, warty, it's just a real character. So that was wonderful. But 20 years ago, Duncan, you got very involved with the estate, and I believe that you were really a radical pioneer in rewilding. So tell us what led you to that decision and what you did about it.
Yeah, it's. I'd love to claim that I had great vision, like Charlie Burrell at NEP did, because we started at roughly the same time. But he did it as a very conscious policy, and we did it, frankly, by accident. But it's all come good now. What happened was the land here is not good farming ground. It's a mixture between clay and gravel. And my father and I were not good farmers, and we always had to employ someone to do the farming. And farming is an industry over the last 30 years whereby that's really the owner of the field needs to be on the tractor to make any margin at all. So we would have a guy who didn't own the land, to wit, an agent, who was always experimenting at our expense. And year in, year out, we lost tons and tons of money farming. And we got fed up with it. So about 30 years ago, the set-aside regime came into being, which allowed you to be paid by the taxpayer not to farm. And my father and I looked at each other and we said, right, we're going to embrace that. And very unusually, we set aside 100% of the farm. And this was something of a scandal amongst the local farmers.
Yes, what was their reaction? What did they phone you up and talk to you about
it?
They
let us know in no uncertain terms that they didn't think we deserved to own the land.
Right.
If you're not going to farm it, they said, then you have no business owning. So they've since revised those thoughts, by the way. They said, even they started to lose money farming, they said, you were quite prescient. Anyway, we got paid sort of enough to stop losing. We didn't make a lot of money. We just stopped losing. And we set aside 100% of the farm. And that was, so we're talking 94 to 2004.
Mm-hmm.
From 2004 to 2014, we entered the Countryside Stewardship Scheme. And again, we didn't farm any of it under that scheme. So we just left it as it was. And in 94, we had planted a lot of grass around the place, but we didn't know any better, to be honest. So the grass continued, and then we started seeing these odd pockets of interesting thing, usually because, let's say, we'd got a game crop wrong or something, and we didn't plant grass, but we didn't do anything else, and we surrounded that area with, let's say, a line of big bales to stop access. And what would happen in an area like that is blackthorn would infest the area, and it became totally an impenetrable mess for the first 10 years. And then in the second 10 years, during the Countryside Stewardship years, we started seeing interesting things, little oak tree saplings emerging from the blackthorn. And these areas proliferated, and my gamekeeper liked the look of what he saw. So he, again, would start sort of encouraging the blackthorn to take over from the grass rather than mowing it. He would leave it in certain areas. And in the end, by the end of the Countryside Stewardship Scheme, we had, obviously a lot of grass, but we also had an increasing amount, let's say 50 acres of these little wild areas, which were now becoming more than just saplings creeping out of blackthorn. They were now had canopies on them, these little oaks, and they were beginning to kill the blackthorn with their shade. And there were quite a few of them. And of course, these blackthorns had been not planted by me. These oaks were not planted by me. They had been planted by jays and field mice. Ted Green told me about the field mice. I had said squirrels. He said, no, you're wrong. It wouldn't be a squirrel. It would be a field mouse. But the jays, you've got right. But we had about 50 acres of what now became scrub land. And we would get into the scrubland with a tractor and a bushwhacker and make little passageways. And of course, what we ended up having was perfect scrub, which was ideal for things like the turtle dove or the nightingale. And so this was all lovely and rather intriguing. And we fell in love with these little areas, as did the gamekeeper. And then 2014 came along. Countryside Stewardship Scheme sadly came to an end because we loved it. We were, as it were, dragged back into farming. We had no choice. We had to farm.
So can I ask you at that point, so that's really fascinating. Did you know about the NEP? I'm just spelling this for our non-British listeners, KNEPP. Did you know about what was happening in NEP, which started in 2001, that there were parallels? Although you say it was more accidental and theirs was more thought about initially. Did you liaise with each other? Were you aware of other projects happening at the same time?
We did not liaise with each other, but what is interesting is that I met Charlie Burrell just before he started because he's a friend of a friend.
Uh-huh.
And I went shooting with that friend who's a local guy. And there was Charlie Burrell having breakfast before the day shooting, and I said, "What are you up to?" He said, "Well, I'm going to. I own a big estate in Sussex, and I'm going to let it go wild." Well, I thought obviously he was insane, but he knew what he was doing, and he's become the kind of poster child for rewilding.
Well, there's a very good book actually for those who don't know it called Wilding by his wife Isabella Tree.
Indeed.
Yes. But anyway, this is why I so loved coming to your estate earlier this year. And then you explained to me what you've been doing as well as the reason why I was there. And I just thought, this is absolutely fantastic. And I think you've been fairly quiet about it. But when I've seen with my eyes and with the group of ARBs who came along, the change in the landscape and the potential that you have, I was fascinated. But going back then to that time when the Countryside Stewardship Scheme finished, what next? What happened then?
So then, as I say, we had to get back into farming. But, and this is where I will credit myself with a bit of, I don't know, good instinct, I think was the best way to put it. They wanted to plow up everything and farm every square inch. And I said, no, we're not doing that. These 50 acres are too intriguing. There's too much going on. There's too much wildlife. There's too much flora as well as fauna. You know, I know we're not going to do that. And as a matter of fact, we are going to impose a really complicated higher level scheme and entry level scheme series of options on the farm map. And in fact, we handed it over to a contractor. And it really was a nightmare for him because his tractor drivers, who are generally plow and spray boys, and right to the edges, found themselves farming this ground, and woe betide them if they plowed up one of my 6-meter margins or sprayed in any of my baby trees.
Yes, because the farmland character around the area, and certainly in North Essex, is one of large fields.
It is.
With few hedgerows, and it can be quite flat, and the local farm workers will be used to those big square fields and just as you say.
Yeah, your typical 25-year-old tractor driver, his instinct is to plow right to the edge.
Yes.
For his boss. He thinks his boss will love that.
Yes.
But this boss did not love that at all. So we then entered in 2014 to 2024. It ends next year. We developed this really weird and unusual mosaic of intensely farmed wheat or barley or oilseed rape fields, cheek by jowl with this amazing now 30 or 25, 30-year-old rewilding patches. Well, that's all very well, but then along comes this concept of biodiversity net gain, which is a brand new idea, all to do with the environmental goals of this country, net zero, etc. Suddenly you're in a position, not for the land you've done, because that's done, but I've got a picture of that Arb Day where you can see very, very clearly the 30-year-old rewilded bit cheek by jowl with a bare barley stubble. And one of the things you must do when you go into the BNG business is you must estimate what's going to happen to the land in 30 years if you let it rewild. Well, the beautiful thing about our land is that you don't have to estimate it. You can see very, very clearly. Here's what's going to happen. See that? I'll do it again. And all I'll do is what I did last time, which is, and I don't want to be facetious here, but I do call it benign neglect. Let nature take its course. Let the jays come in, plant the oaks. Don't cut it. Let the blackthorn come, let the bramble come. It will go in due course. And all your job is to keep a gentle hand on the tiller. And so we have now developed, as part of our environmental strategy for the next 30 years, we are going to enter about 70 hectares, which is about 15% of our land, into BNG schemes. And we will develop BNG credits, which we will sell as offsets to people like home builders, national highways, government, local authorities, etc. The really nice thing from my standpoint is that I'm no longer taking money if I do this. By the way, I haven't signed any yet because it takes an awfully long time. Because you've got to get the local authority involved, and you've got to do the ecological surveys, etc. It's all taking a bit of time. But should we complete it as planned, the people paying us for this stewardship or new stewardship of the land will be the house builder, not the taxpayer. Mm-hmm. And that makes a big difference, because for 20 years, I've been taking taxpayers' money, and people don't like paying you for doing nothing, even though we weren't actually doing nothing. But we weren't growing food, and people object to that. Whereas they feel less bad if the dastardly house builder who's making more money than God is having to pay.
I think there'd be some house builders who might say they're not making more money than God, but certainly the perception. No, definitely. And so biodiversity net gain is going to come in January 2024, so next January for larger schemes and April for the smaller schemes. But currently it's not compulsory, but it's already sort of happening. So lots of schemes I've been working on are all achieving or trying to achieve biodiversity net gain at 10%. Obviously the objective is to try and do it on the site where you're developing, but it's not always possible. And so schemes like yours are really going to facilitate that process.
Yes, I mean, that's called the off-site option. And what will happen is invariably a 100-house housing estate will have just so much potential to offset the environmental harm that they have incurred by building this thing and taking it out of greenfield site. And so what that developer will need to do is offset that, and he can't do it on site, so he goes off site, and that's where I come in, and I say, fine, I will sell you these credits, and then I commit over 30 years to delivering that ecological gain, hence the net gain.
When you started it accidentally, as it were, presumably when you just left the farm and just handed it over to set aside, did you at that point have any ecological studies carried out as a baseline?
Sadly not, and I scold myself.
No, I know, I can imagine. That wasn't quite the thing then, was it? But I mean, I know you are having ecological studies now and involved with Operation Turtle Dove. Tell us about the turtle doves.
As part of the biodiversity net gain process, you have to have a very serious ecological study done so you can measure how you're providing the net gain. What we have done is to do some, over the last 10 years or so, some sort of bird counts and try to track the changes there. So, and you know, a lot of this is anecdotal, but we've counted 80 species of different farmland birds here most recently. And some of those have, you know, sadly diminished, like the lapwing. We see very few lapwing now, even with the farm ground. But then again, we are seeing more of others. You know, the turtle dove, having gone completely, is coming back. And I, for the very first time in my life, had a nightingale all summer in my garden. I got a little bit of rewilding at the back of my garden, which is perfect nightingale country. And that was just mind-blowing and just wonderful.
How wonderful. So I wonder if having the existing rewilded area for the last 20, 30 years right next to where you're going to rewild, I wonder if it will be faster. I wonder if the powers of seed dispersal and blackthorn suckering will speed up what actually happened all those years ago. I wonder if you might get a quicker result. And I wonder if you've learnt anything from what happened before to try and make it even better.
Yes, I think we have. I think the husbandry of scrub is something we've learned a little bit about, which was non-existent with the first lot. That's point one. Point two, I think what we might do, if we can afford the fencing, is put some animals in.
Yes.
They, of course, are wonderful spreaders, and they do a lot of the munching of the lower branches and this and the other, and that can always encourage things to go up faster when you're, you know, stopping them going out. A plant will go up, and some good old I don't know, longhorn cattle or some pigs, yes, or something like that can do that, and they rough up the ground and move stuff around. So those are two examples of how we might get things to move faster. My wife and I always argue about she thinks it's important to put, if you've got a big open space, put a few oak trees in to encourage the jays to use them as markers for their acorns, stuff like that. And I think there's some truth to that. I've always said, no, just it'll come. But she said, no, you've got to use markers. And then if you put one in, you'll suddenly find 4 or 5 wild ones have suddenly appeared. And it's quite mysterious how it works. And we asked Ted Green, why in that field did 4 oak trees or 5 oak trees suddenly appear? And he had an immediate explanation, of course, something to do with field mice. And rather charmingly, the field mice are very naughty. They steal each other's nuts and then take them a bit further off. So there's nothing better than a naughty field mouse stealing from his mate, because then you get several all together and you get yourself a nice little copse.
Wonderful. Nature is absolutely wonderful, left to its own devices.
Yes, I love the idea of the field mouse nicking his mate's nuts.
Yeah.
And then sort of living off his neighbor's work. I feel rather sorry for the one that thinks he's buried one and he hasn't. It's been dug up by his mate and taken off.
And all of this wildlife that we're talking about, and particularly if you bring in longhorn cattle, such as they do as Knepp, have you thought about ecotourism? Because that people are hankering, particularly city dwellers, are hankering to go somewhere and have a wild experience. I mean, my family and I went to a Knepp wildlife safari earlier this year in the evening, which was just magical. Is that something you think about?
Yes, I think it is, but I don't think we would have them sort of glamping and staying. We're just not big enough like Knepp. But I do think, Sharon, you saw the reaction of people when we did our little tour.
Yes.
And it is really amazing to see what nature can do. So I very much would welcome sort of inter-day trips where we can walk around 2 or 3 different areas that we've rewilded and show them the park, which, as you may remember, Ted Green walked in and said, this place is overly manicured. And I had to say to him, well, the reason this is manicured is because we're in the weddings business, and that's what funds a lot of this. The surpluses from weddings allows me to be less, should we say, bottom line orientated about the farm. Because many people say, well, why could you afford to do 70 acres of rewilding? And one of the reasons is because of the event business. But even in the park, we're pursuing a policy of not over manicuring it. I mean, in front of the house, that's one thing, but around the other 500 acres inside the park, we're doing a lot of letting the grass grow long, not mowing it. And it all looks, a little bit scruffy, to be honest. But that's all to the good. We don't cut down dead trees anymore. Or if a tree does fall down, we let it rot. So these are all things that in my father's day would never have happened. He would have immediately had it cut up and mown all around and keep it neat and tidy. That's all a big change.
I wonder, actually, Duncan, in 10, 15 years' time, if the wedding venue business would really welcome a more rewilded photographic environment. I mean, I understand now the predominant culture is that you would go to a wedding venue, you want the mown grass and the neat, pretty flowers. But I wonder if, and this is rather a hopeful wonder of mine, if society would become increasingly aware and informed and would actually start to see more beauty in these rewilded landscapes. I don't mean brides sort of taking their big gown for a load of blackthorn, but just something that is less manicured. I just wonder if fashions will change, because all we're talking about is fashion.
No, that's already happening. That's already happening. We have a wildflower meadow just to the west of the house. And in about August, that's lovely and golden and long.
Oh, that's great.
They can't get enough of it. They're straight in there. They love the long grass and the wild look. Interesting thing, though, would they prefer to get actually the marriage ceremony? I mean, last weekend, my son, who's not particularly religious, got married in a kind of secular service out there, and we had bailed up the wildflower meadow, but there in the background were these wildflower bales all scattered around the place, and it was a sort of pastoral idyll, and it was lovely, not at all tidy at all, and it's going with the whole informality of weddings increasingly now. Gone are the 3-course sit-down dinners. Much more, let's have after the reception, let's have a pizza. Let's have a burger, or let's have a kind of fast food van, fish and chips and things like that coming in. rather than your formal three-courser. And the young particularly loving it, and the informality of it. And
Interesting.
it really is. It's all changing.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, when you come down that drive and the lawn in front, I think always people like to see the stripes just in front of the house.
I have to say I like them too. But talking about fashions, you mentioned the golf course.
It was put in 53.
And I've been to the golf course, not as a golfer, but I've been there. And it's at the moment, a lot of it is very traditional, how one might imagine a golf course with manicured grass, some conifers and some formal lines of tree planting, which is very much the style. But you've got great plans for that as well.
We do. And my son, Arlo, who's my fifth child, he's a landscape architect. He's just finished a master's at Greenwich. And when he was at Edinburgh University, he sent me a plan completely off his own bat saying, I think we can make this golf course disappear in the parkland. And he sort of did a lot of photo grabs and computer graphics. He's doing graphic design at Edinburgh, and he was very adept at that. And so he would do screen grabs and move. He'd read our parkland restoration plan, which was all about getting rid of that 1950s conifer planting, very golf coursey planting, trees that don't belong in an English parkland setting. And he improving the sight lines. A lot of this block planting was blocking the sort of sight lines that you would expect to see in a 19th century English park. And so he as it were, cut and pasted and took the golf course away from the house. So we're going to eliminate one of the holes and the tees nearest the house and extend it onto the practice ground, which is a sort of ecological desert anyway. And then really let the grass grow long, so the rough goes sort of waist height. We don't cut it sort of at shin height. It goes to waist height. We're going to get rid of the bunkers because they don't belong in a park, sand. So what we'll do is still have traps, but they'll be sort of thick, long grass in the bottoms. So from an aerial standpoint, you won't be able to see. Then we'll as I said, we'll parklandize the planting, and so we'll have clumps of parkland trees, a la a parkland, rather than these big blocky things. And then hopefully, much improve the course, bring in some more water, restore all the ponds. There's one pond which needs is basically a dead pond, which you, Sharon, have seen, and it needs to get the light in. It needs some flow. It needs to be dredged, and we'll bring some life back into it, and then make it actually a little bit of a feature, so that it becomes rather difficult to get onto the green, because you're going to have to go over this lovely new pond, and then also restore some of the ponds on the other parts of the course. There are 2 or 3 little ponds which need reviving. And in fact, our ghost pond restoration plan is going to be quite ambitious. Across the estate as a whole, we are going to restore, we think, something like 14 ghost ponds and old dead ponds. And that is a part of the next 10 years, which I'm really excited about.
And what do you think the golfers will think?
Very good question. Very good question. Luckily, the golf club here is it's not a club, it's what I would call a benign dictatorship. So we can do these things, and they obviously all shout and scream and hate it. And then once it's all settled down, they love it. So I'm going to have to take some flack, I suspect.
Well, thank you very much, Duncan. You've taken flack in the past with the farming, and now you're going to take flack from the golfers, but all will come good in the end. And I love the fact that you're also pioneering what a wedding can look like, something I wasn't expecting you to say. And I really hope this is part of a national and global movement to give more space for nature and also to make it attractive, hopefully make it viable for you as well. And really as a sort of showpiece for what can be done on what was a traditional estate with great historic importance to something, bringing it forward to back in the past, in other words, when it was more natural.
Yeah, there's no reason why these businesses, so we've done obviously the event side, obviously the farming side. There's no reason farming can't coexist with natural regeneration. Ditto the wedding side, ditto the golf side. And of course, there's our shoot. I think shooting is going to change over the next 20 years. I think, as it were, putting birds down to shoot them, I think it's going to diminish. I think wild bird shooting will come back. The size of bags will, I think, rapidly decrease. And I think shooting will become much more about the experience of being out there with nature. And of course, there is nobody on this estate that knows nature better than my gamekeeping family. What they don't know about songbirds and what benefits them, etc., is not worth knowing, frankly. It's steeped. It's in their DNA. They're wonderful guardians of the countryside. So, of course, to the extent that shooting becomes a bit more wild orientated, that also is part of that whole story. And I think, there's the financial implications of what we're doing and what NEP are doing are pretty positive.
I mean, yes, going back to shooting, that can be a complex narrative to put across to the non-shooting fraternity.
It does, but I'm a passionate, countryman. I'm a trustee of something called the Country Food Trust. So I am absolutely determined that what we harvest here is used. It's a most wonderful meat, as is venison, by the way. And we've got a big problem with venison in this country, or the numbers of deer. The deer population is totally out of control and needs to be controlled. And one of the things we should be doing, for instance, and as a Country Food Trust trustee, I can tell you this is something we're working on, and we do it with our pheasants, is we feed the homeless with our game. And if the number of pheasants shot per year in this country is diminishing, which I think it will, surely we must get a strategy going at government level, whereby we get more deer shot, because if you don't, you're going to lose all the trees that you've been planting, and this is already a problem. But both game and wing game and venison is fantastic meat, high in protein, which is what people need, particularly children. When they are going to school, they need protein to develop brains and their bodies. If you're homeless, you need protein to keep yourself healthy, and of course to supplement the carbohydrates which are freely available in places like homeless shelters here. Lots of carbohydrates, lots of pasta, lots of rice, lots of potatoes, but very, very little protein, which is the expensive thing. So if we can find a way of channeling game to these people that can't afford it, and in our situation, it's not only available, it's incredibly cheap. And people say, well, we don't like it, we don't like the taste, but we've done taste tests in our cookery school, and we don't tell them what it is, and they absolutely love it. And then they hear it's a venison. What's venison? Well, it's deer. Oh, and then they don't like it anymore. But so there's a big education thing to be done there. But that, again, is very circular.
Low food miles.
No, very few food miles.
Sometimes no food miles.
No, and we are increasingly, my son, another of my children is a chef, and he is increasingly feeding people venison, partridge, pheasant, as well as lamb. He cooks it with a Caroline twist. But being able to eat the harvest off your own estate in an events business is gold dust, it's just wonderful.
Duncan, I always ask our guests, what is your dream scenario for the future?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. My dream scenario for the surrounding community generally, or for my family here?
For the community generally.
My dream scenario would be a control of what I would regard at the moment to be out of control expansion of urban ribbon development in Essex particularly. Much better control over that. And I think we're getting it in Essex. We're getting some protection of what's important in the country. I think Essex County Council are really out there at the front of, valuing natural regeneration. I'm getting fantastic support for what we're doing here. So that's important. So that the planning strategy recognizes the value of countryside, trees, natural regen. Secondly, that people who live here in Essex, a lot of them have come from London, and or their parents have come from London, and they're quite urban centric. So it would be lovely if you got a real appreciation of what people like us are doing. And I'll tell you, for instance, where that manifests itself is the appalling litter problem that we have in the country roads. And
It seems to be getting worse.
It's getting much worse. And I'm really, really passionate about that. Last year we did a big festival with 300 children from the Bloom Academy called Let's Talk Trash. And what we want to do is to try and execute a revolution here whereby the local kids of Essex become really passionate wearers of the anti-litter badge. Do you remember when kids stopped drinking and driving about 2 generations ago? It was almost overnight.
Yes.
And whoever pulled that off was a genius. And we need to do the same with litter. And my dream would be that Essex and the kids of Essex lead the country in becoming almost like the Japanese or the Norwegians or the Singaporeans about just not tolerating it.
I think that's a wonderful dream scenario.
And if we can do anything there, and we're going to do Let's Talk Trash 2, it's going to be much bigger. Essex County Council are right behind it. We're going to have many more schools. We're going to go pan Essex, and then hopefully we go East Anglia, and then we hope to go national. But there's a wonderful man called John Reed, who's one-man show running an operation called Clean Up Britain, and I would urge all of your listeners to look up cleanupbritain.org, I think it is. Just Clean Up Britain, one word. What he does is incredible. He's a one man. He's poured 14 years and a great deal of his own personal money into it, and he's the sort of chap that this government needs to become an anti-litter czar. So that would be a dream of mine.
Thank you so much, Duncan Clark. That was absolutely fascinating.
All right, Sharon. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks to Duncan for really taking us through the journey, how the estate has evolved. And it was interesting to hear that he started rewilding at the same time as a Knepp estate. It was a real privilege to go there recently with a group of wonderful ARBs, and to see with our own eyes what 30 years of rewilding looks like, and to stand on the field where it's going to happen next. I wonder if it will actually become wilder quicker because of that immediate proximity to other trees. Well, amongst many of my dear great thinking arbs was the wonderful Ted Green. And Ted Green, MBE, has got his book coming out very soon called Tree Time, which is going to be for sale shortly with the Arboricultural Association. So we have the great privilege of interviewing Ted in a few weeks' time, a sort of This Is Your Life special, where we will meander through his incredible life and all the wonderful people that he knows. So we're really looking forward to that. And since we last spoke to you last week, we're pleased to report that our conference is really taking shape. So it is now the Trees Planning and Construction Conference on the 20th of February 2024 in Essex, England, in Braxted Park itself. So if you've enjoyed the podcast, come to the conference and see the landscape for yourself. So we have some great speakers lined up. Tickets will be on sale in the beginning of November, shortly after the National Tree Officers Association Conference. So look out for my posts on LinkedIn. Next week, we'll be talking about how to identify tree roots. See you then.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please do.
Is it true that you can identify Ted's age by the rings around his neck?
She's a lady, she's a lady, she's a lady who can help you with a problem with trees. She's a lady, I mean maybe, if there's a subject to accompany a walk, you'll probably find it on the Tree Day Talk.